thought that would possibly call the meeting to order. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both here in the hall and also 60-odd of you who are on Zoom. Welcome to the 2024 general election hustings for Richmond Park. And I'm very pleased to have 4 of the 7 candidates here in alphabetical order, but not necessarily in degrees of political stance. On my far right, but your far left, is Laura Corrison for the Labour Party. Next to her is Sarah Ghazdari. I knew I wouldn't get that right, sorry. On my left is Sarah is for the Conservative Party. On my left is Sarah Olney for the Liberal Democrats. And on my extreme left is Chaz Warno for the Green Party. So they're very welcome. Now, of the other 3 candidates, Richard Harrison for the Social Democrats can't be here, but he has got a short statement which will be read out on his behalf shortly. And the other 2, there's Chris Finch, whose address is the Mitre, so my guess is that he's probably running his pub this evening. And there is Michael Hearn from the Reform Party, Reform UK, of whom we've heard nothing other than that he's a candidate. So, the procedure for this evening is that each candidate will have 2 minutes to sell their story to you. As they come up to the 2 minutes, Stephen will ring a small bell. If they go over their allotted time, he will wave his hand at me and I will ring my big bell. And if they're really difficult and won't stop speaking, we'll turn their microphones off. We will then take questions, pre-submitted questions. We had quite a lot, and we've tried to group them around various subjects. So if you submitted a question, it won't necessarily be posed as you asked it. And each candidate is then asked to answer the question for no more than 2 minutes per question. And then we will take questions from the floor. And as far as the candidates are concerned, please answer the questions, because nothing irritates voters so much as politicians who don't answer the questions. And when we get to questions from the floor, again, it's the views of the candidates that everybody wants to hear, rather than our particular opinions. So please bear that in mind. Just one other thing before we begin. Democracy is incredibly important, and we are incredibly lucky in this country that we can vote to change governments. There are many places where this isn't possible. So hustings, as part of the democratic process, are your opportunity to hear from people who are going to represent you. But we get the politicians we deserve. And if we, as society, behave in an objectionable fashion, writing ghastly things on social media, showing no respect to people who are brave enough to put themselves forward, to be questioned by the electorate, or mad enough, we will not get people who are willing to do that. Now, being Richmond Park, you will be an entirely civilized and polite audience, but it's a message that I think we need to send to people elsewhere. So enough of me, and perhaps we'd start. Stephen, could you read the SDP statement from Richard Harrison?
For the next 2 minutes, I'm Richard Harrison. And my apologies for not being able to attend this evening's event. I am Richard Harrison, a resident of Richmond and a member of the Richmond Society. I'm also a strong supporter of the policies of the Social Democratic Party. Who, you may ask, are the SDP? Didn't they disappear years ago? In a word, no. The party, formerly led by David Owen, is alive and well and experiencing strong revival under its brilliant leader, William Clouston. What's more, polls show that SDP's policies, economically left-leaning and socially conservative are actually those policies that the public wants. For example, the SDP believes in taking the railways and utilities back into public ownership, an expansion of nuclear power to help solve the energy crisis, and the provision of affordable housing. It promotes policies that support the family and community. It is against the denigration of British culture and history in schools, universities, and institutions. It supports freedom of speech and thought in universities. It also seeks to control mass immigration, reducing net migration to 50,000 annually. As a writer, educational publisher, and university lecturer, I lived and worked overseas in various countries for many years, including Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman. I always enjoyed returning to the cultural diversity of my home city, London, but the inexorable rise of mass migration and the pressure it places on health services, housing, and schools makes me realize migration is now unsustainable and needs to be drastically controlled. Finally, I find the fossilized two-party system not only intolerable, but also very unhealthy for democracy. Many voters are apathetic, believing they only have a choice between two parties, which they either like or dislike. Which they either dislike or despise. The SDP wants to end the unfair electoral system that restricts fresh ideas and new thinking. The only way to end this discredited system is for voters to vote for the party and policies they want, and not those they vote for reluctantly out of habit. Please have a look at the SDP website, sdp.org.uk, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have by email, richard.harrison@sdp.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, appearing as Richard Harrison. Now, Laura, would you like to start? Or where you feel comfortable, probably sitting at the table.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? No. Can you... Too much now? Great, can you hear me better now? Okay, great, I'll try not to break this microphone. Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Laura Corriton, and I'm your Labour Party candidate for Richmond Park. Thanks very much for joining us, and for the Richmond Society for hosting as well. Now, for years, many of us will have felt that we've had to do a lot of waiting. We've had to wait for doctor's appointments, we've had to wait for the Hammersmith Bridge to open, waiting for the cost of living to ease, waiting for the next scandal, the next problem, the next international disaster. But right now, I feel optimistic, and I feel hopeful for change. Labour have many policies that I'm really proud to support and champion. As a founder of an educational social enterprise, I'm proud of Labour's policy to bring free breakfast clubs to primary schools, because I know teachers who have had to use their offices as food banks to feed hungry learners. As a gender equality campaigner and author whose petition successfully ended the tampon tax, which is the luxury tax rate once applied to period products, I believe in Labour's plans to fast-track through the criminal justice system crimes which disproportionately impact women. As someone who has worked or studied their entire adult life and still can't afford a home in London, I'm eager for Labour to start building 1.5 million homes to give young working people a chance at home security. Austerity, Brexit, Partygate, mini-budget. We've been waiting a long time for things to get better, but now is the time for change. If you want a government that will invest in public services, make our streets safer, and get the country building, then vote for change, vote for Labour. Thanks very much. Looking forward to your questions.
Good evening, everyone. I am Sara Ghazdari, and I'm your parliamentary candidate, your Conservative parliamentary candidate for Richmond Park in North Kingston. Let me start by saying thank you so much for having us this evening. It is great to be amongst friends. As a child, I was born under a communist regime in Albania, and I fled the country in 1997 during the civil war. I lived in foster care in Italy for a while before being reunited with my family. I know what it means to go without. I know what it means not to have democracy, freedom, or choices. But I love our special corner of London. And as a single mother of two beautiful children, Eduardo and Sophia, I'm incredibly lucky to raise my family here. And I am here to make the difference, and that is because I believe in people. And from day one, for me, this has been about people and not politics. My priorities are your priorities. I have listened to you. That is why I want to make our streets safer, champion our education, protect our wonderful green spaces in Richmond, boost our local businesses, improve our transport link, but most of all and always, listen to all of you, to my community in Richmond Park. For too often, I heard people, and I hear people saying to me that they do not feel that they've got a strong voice on the green benches. And we need a strong voice in Richmond Park. If we end up with a Labour government that will increase taxes, we will need a strong opposition. And we do not have that in Richmond. And that is why I am here, to be your local candidate, your strong voice. We are incredibly lucky to live here locally in Richmond Park. But I want to make Richmond Park even a better place. And you'll see, hopefully, from my answers this evening, that I don't speak in empty rhetoric. I'm not here to pay lip services for vote. For with me, what you see is what you get. And that is passion, commitment, and consistency. And I will do that by listening to you and standing up for you with conviction and integrity. Thank you.
Sarah, do you want to go next?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Olney. I'm standing as the Liberal Democrat candidate here in Richmond Park. I've served as the Member of Parliament for Richmond Park for our community for the last 4.5 years. It's been the greatest privilege of my life. It's been a very difficult few years, but I've seen our community rise to the challenge time and time again, looking out for each other, for their neighbours, for the wider community. And that refusal to stand by and let others struggle is something I have always tried to encapsulate as your MP. I fought to put more police officers on our streets, to halt Thames Water's plans to build a pipeline across Hamlands and to block the third runway. As a Liberal Democrat, I'm often asked if we can actually make a difference in Parliament, but since 2019, our campaigning has changed the conversation time and time again. In Westminster, my party was the first to call for a windfall tax to help with the cost of living. We brought the sewage scandal into the public eye, and we were the first party in the UK to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. But while we have been fighting to protect our constituents, the Conservatives have crashed the economy and cut public services to the bone. So if you will allow me to represent you for another 5 years, I will spend every day defending our community and fighting for a better future for Richmond Park. Thank you.
Hello, hi, I'm Chaz Warlow. I'm the Green Party candidate. I'm a councillor here in Richmond. I was elected in 2022. This is actually my home patch, South Richmond. So if you live here, you might know, and you probably should know, that I'm one of your councillors. And if you don't live here, well, you know, that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. I have been listening to residents. I've been taking action on a range of issues like housing, like planning, like waste collection, like things where facilities are being closed down and we shouldn't be closing them down. So I am used to listening to people and doing whatever I can to help them. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I can only direct people in the right direction. But I'm here to stand up for green values, and that is why the Green Party and what the Green Party is doing on Richmond Council. We are holding the Lib Dems to their promises. You know, they have ambitious plans, so do we. We want to green the economy, and so do they. We want to hold them to those promises and make sure that even in Parliament, where if Sarah gets elected, that she will know that there is a strong Green presence here and a strong vote that she needs to listen to. And if, say, Labour form the next government, then the same thing applies. They need to know that there's a strong Green voice that is pushing for the urgent transition that we all know needs to be made from fossil fuel economy to a green economy. We're looking to invest hugely in that economy and also in affordable housing and also in retrofitting and in active travel. It's a lot, as well as investing in the NHS and in social care. There's a lot of work to be done. There's been a lot of damage in the last couple of decades, and we need to redress that balance urgently. It'll be tough, but we have the plans to do it. We have the taxation plans that can bring that revenue. We have the future in our hands, and we just need to show it.
Right, well, now we turn to the pre-submitted questions. And the first one really follows on, I think, quite neatly from the statements made by each of you. So each of you, this is personal qualities. Which of your personal qualities are most relevant to fulfilling your obligations to constituents if you're elected? No more than 3, please. So let's start with Laura.
Thank you. This is a really good question. This question hasn't come up previously in the previous hustings, and I'm kind of glad that it has today, because I think it's really important to have a politician that has the right qualities. I think one of the best qualities that I bring to the table is integrity. I'm not afraid to talk about things that are stigmatized, like the tampon tax campaign, for example, talking about period stigma, period shame, period poverty. So many people thought that this was not even, on their radars when I started the petition in 2014. But over 10 years of campaigning, we got 300,000 signatures, the support of President Obama, changed UK law, EU law, and implemented the tampon tax funds through the government, which gave almost £100 million to female-focused charities. So I think it's that dedication to really speak up for what I believe in that I think will make the society better, and especially those voices that haven't been listened to previously is my biggest quality.
It's a very good question, as Laura said, and it hasn't come up, but it's great because we're asking you to actually trust us enough to give us your vote. As I said, I speak based on my personal experience, and that is somebody who has been through a lot of hardship, a lot of losses in her life. I think one of the biggest things that I would say today is resilience, fight back, and never give up. I went from having basically a country where nationalizes everything, a socialist country, a communist country that nationalizes everything, and as a child having to go and grab the water from the 4th floor to the 1st floor and going and getting the portions of food, what the country decided that you should be able to eat, to today having the opportunity to stand for democracy, freedom and choices. So I would never take that for granted. I will fight incredibly hard for all of you, and I will make sure that my commitment, my passion, but most of all, my dedication and my love for Richmond Park comes up in every fight, in every time I stand in Parliament, and every time I walk on those streets and meet all of you, because ultimately, you're all my neighbors, you're all my friends, and you will be even after this election, because I'm not planning to go anywhere else.
Just been reflecting on this. I think for me, it's probably my sense of curiosity. Even after 4.5 years, there is, I've learned something new every single day that I've been the MP for Richmond Park, mostly because the people who live in Richmond Park are some of the most fascinating and remarkable people, I think. And there is always, always something new to learn. And I'm always so interested whenever I meet somebody new to find out about them, about what's going on in their life. Obviously what I can do to help, but I always want to learn new things, and there is such a fabulous opportunity to do that as the MP for Richmond Park. And I plan if you'll let me to carry on doing that. I don't think there will ever come a point where I think I have met everybody and learned everything there is to know. There will always be new things to learn, and I very much look forward to being able to do that.
What a terrible question. As Tristram Shandy said, there's nothing worse than having to talk about yourself. I think my answer is that I'm a Green Party member, a Green Party councillor, and now a candidate out of personal conviction in the move to a sustainable society. That's how I live. That's how I lived before I got involved in politics. It doesn't come from above, it comes from inside. And that's what I will carry through. If I'm elected, I will just continue with that same conviction. It's just in there.
I'm going to intervene and ask a supplementary, which is, if you were elected as MP for Richmond Park and your constituents' interests conflicted with your party line, would you defy the party whips?
I personally think it depends on the issue, I guess. It depends on like how strongly I feel about it. If I can convince you otherwise, if I feel that, you know, strongly it is the best thing for society at large, what's best for Richmond isn't always what's best for the nation, and we kind of need to think about that as well. So yeah, it would really depend on the issue, but always want to hear your thoughts, obviously, and your opinions, and try and find a good balance and feed that back.
I think I'm going to go back to the speech that I gave at the beginning. For me, this is about people and not politics, and this is about people in Richmond Park and not politics. So my number one alignment is to people in Richmond Park. I will fight incredibly hard to bring the Richmond Park values on the green benches and make sure that the party listens to me. And as half Italian and half Albanian woman, you better believe that my voice can be quite strong when needed.
There is such a diversity of opinion within Richmond Park. I think it would be really, really difficult to say on any given topic that there's a Richmond Park point of view and that would conflict with my party's point of view. And that's why we have elected representatives. We have one person who goes forward and says, this is what I think and this is how I'm going to vote. And I think the other point about it is that you can only affect change if there are enough numbers. And that's why we come together in political parties to represent, to make up those numbers, to be a force for change, which is more than a single individual can manage. So I think my answer to that is probably, you know what I stand for, you know I'm a Liberal Democrat, you're welcome to go and have a look at our manifesto so you can broadly understand where I'm coming from. But I will always, always listen to what it is that other people want to say, always listen and always reflect on what I think might be the best for the constituency as a whole, but I'm not always going to, that may well sometimes conflict with party policy, but these are not straightforward decisions, and just to echo Laura, it will very much depend on the individual thing at stake. What I can say is I can't think of a situation in the last 4.5 years where I've been in that position.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Notwithstanding what Sarah said, I think there are going to be moments where you have to either make a different decision. The Green Party doesn't actually whip people into line anyway. You are allowed to have a different opinion on various issues. I mean, the main thing that drives my decision-making on any specific issue is whether or not it contributes to a sustainable society, a sustainable way of life. So not every manifesto will cover everything. Yes, there are lots of policies in the Green Party, almost covering every single different thing, but sometimes it's not covered. So it's going to be the same for every party. You're not going to always know exactly what the party line is, and you have to move from a principle then of how you think you should act. So it's possible that I could disagree with the party line.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Well, let's move on to a different topic, which is future vision. And the question is, government spending of 1.2 trillion represents 45% of UK GDP. To move towards your party's vision of the country's future, what percentage would you like this to reach in 5 years and 10 years' time? Let's go in reverse order. Chaz this time.
I can't give an answer to that percentage. You want me to speak louder? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah? Oh, okay. Did you not hear the last answer? Okay. All right. I can't give a percentage answer on that. I know that our party's commitments are there, fully costed in our manifesto, because we know that there's a need for that level of public spending. But we know how we can achieve that through reforming the tax system and through obtaining, well, for instance, from the wealthiest people in our society, we're proposing a wealth tax of 1% on assets of £10 million and over. That doesn't affect you or me, probably. I assume not. Looking around the room, I don't know. Maybe someone would stick up their hand and say, I have assets of 10 million, or maybe not. So, you know, there are ways of raising revenue, and yes, it will require, you know, some additional borrowing, but this is an urgent situation. You know, we can't afford to wait any longer. There's been enough waiting around. In 2005, there was a report by Nick Stern who said, well, you've got to spend the money now, because otherwise, to decarbonize our society is going to take even more money later on down the line. You know, have we listened to that? I'm not sure we have. I don't really think we have. So we don't really have much more option. We don't have time to delay any further. And so, yes, there will be a burden, but it'll also be offset by the gains from the green economy, which is currently worth about £71 billion annually, and of course that's set to grow with the stimulus that's required, and a consistent stimulus that gives confidence to sectors that are desperately in need of confidence and consistency and stability. So although I can't give a percentage, I think that it will evolve, the economy will evolve.
I think the answer to the question is 46%. And I say that because, and we have set this out quite clearly in our manifesto, we think we need to invest. There is some urgent requirement for infrastructure investment. The sorts of things we're looking at, our NHS infrastructure, our hospitals, some of them are crumbling. They urgently need to be rebuilt. Likewise, our schools. We saw about a year ago, I think we were all incredibly worried about the impact of RAC, and that hasn't gone away, even if we're not talking about it. We're committing about $8.5 billion to tackling climate change, protecting the natural environment. The most urgent thing we need to do is to upgrade people's homes to make them much more energy efficient. That will save people's household bills, but it takes some upfront investment to make that happen. We need better transport. We need more homes, and that will include 150,000 homes for social rent a year. And we also need to spend some money in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and to devolve that money so they can spend it on their priorities. And that money will need to be borrowed, but we estimate that the 19.7 billion a year is less than 1% of GDP to add to the 45% that was quoted, so that's why I think the answer is 46%. But all the measures that we're planning to invest in should boost growth, and that's ultimately what we need, and we can't get there without some investment. So that's what we're committing to in our manifesto. We think that's sensible, we think that's proportional, but above all, we think as I say, it will boost growth, and that's what we need more than anything else. What we expect to see is that debt would be falling as a percentage of GDP by the final year of the Parliament if our investment measures are successful. And obviously, as I say, if we are able to kickstart that growth, which we think will follow as a result of these investments.
So we have faced an unprecedented crisis. I just want to touch base on 2010, and I don't know if you hear me, because I feel I hear myself back. In 2010, when we inherited Labour, from the government from Labour, I just want to remind you, there was a message from one of the ministers saying, there is no money left. That is what we inherited in 2010. And since then, we've tried to work incredibly hard to boost the economy. Then we faced the worldwide pandemic, which was an unprecedented crisis worldwide, not just for the UK economy, but for the rest of the world. And that Putin invading Ukraine All of this has had a huge impact on our families, on the household budget. But at the same time, because of some difficult decisions that we had to make, because we had to borrow a lot of money to, for example, pay furlough or invest into the NHS, we have increased the funding. I'm just going to give you some numbers. For example, in NHS, we've boosted our funding by 1/3 in real time. We're talking about £165 billion. Same goes for education. We're almost about 60 billion investing on education. And that is what a successful government does. But at the same time, what a successful government does is reducing inflation from 11% to 2%, as in the other day, by making and sticking to some very difficult decisions and being incredibly responsible and sensible for the household budget. But we also have to look at the future. We have to invest. I'm very passionate about venture capital. I did a master's. I completed a master's last year, even though I'm quite oldish to do that. But I went to Imperial College and followed my passion on tech and venture capital and startups. And we're incredibly lucky in this country because 25% of the tech project is actually UK-based. It's something we should be incredibly proud of. We've got the money, we've got the talent, we've got the projects, and we can showcase it to the world. And the last thing I'm going to say, we are the second largest exporter in services around the world, and that's a great achievement. And we should be looking at growth, we should be looking at hope, but we should be doing it with positivity.
Great, so just to rebut a little bit to begin with, just to flag, in 2010, the economy was growing at 2.2%. It's obviously at 0% now, especially following the Liz Truss mini-budget. And, you know, the Conservatives have had 14 years to solve lots of problems, and they've made most of them worse. But I could go into the scandals and scandals and scandals we've had, but I'm not going to do that because I want to focus on more positive things today. So yeah, Labour Party has a really clear vision to get the economy moving and to deliver economic stability across the country. We'll put in place things like tougher fiscal rules, well-paid jobs with an industrial strategy, a real living wage to reflect the cost of living crisis, to give people that stability that they need. We'll end 0 hours contracts for security at work, so people have more money in their pockets to spend on the economy. We'll halve the government's consultancy spending, which we think is really inefficient. And we'll end this VIP fast lane procurement process, which we know and have seen, especially through COVID, ends in really disastrous consequences. So lots of things that Labour's going to be doing to put the economy back on its feet. Thanks.
Well, I note that 2 of the candidates did answer the question, and two didn't, so you may want to note that. Anyway, that neatly leads on to the next question, which is the subject of tax. Everybody likes having long spending lists. I'm talking to the electorate. When it comes to paying the bills, people are usually rather less enthusiastic. So, anyway, the question is, this morning the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, suggested that unless the parties break their fiscal promises or get lucky with the economy, the public is faced with the stark choice of higher taxes or worse public services. Which is your party counting on to get the books to balance, and how much of the bill will be passed to local councils to meet from council tax increases? Let's start with Sarah.
Well, I'm glad you started with me, Louise, because as the Liberal Democrats Treasury spokesperson, I have been very heavily involved in putting together the tax and spend elements of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, and I'm glad to get an opportunity to talk about them. We are going to raise 27 billion in taxes, and we have worked out 27 billion pounds worth of spending that we think is absolutely necessary. So I refute what the IFS say, that we are not being honest about the challenges, and particularly I would note that that is going much further than either the Conservatives or the Labour Party are planning to do. Our tax reforms are around things like reversing cuts to banking taxes, making capital gains tax fairer. We are looking at the windfall tax I mentioned earlier on oil and gas companies and a range of other different things. Now, the things that we think are an absolute essential to be spending on are things like improvements to the NHS. And I know from speaking to local people that the biggest thing that people worry about is access to GP appointments. We've got a plan for that. We are also wanting to invest in our hospital infrastructure and also, and this will be close to many people's hearts, access to cancer care, because we are really lagging behind our European counterparts and we need to address that. In education, we really want to see a mental health professional in every school, and we want to reverse the cuts to our armed forces, which is becoming an increasingly important priority, not just for us as a nation, but I know for many individuals who are increasingly alarmed at what they see happening overseas. So those are the kinds of things that we are talking about. I think that we are being honest with the public about the fact, as I say, we have been bolder in our taxes than other parties are being. But also, what we're not doing, I think this is to the point of the question, what we are not doing in our manifesto, we are not saying, because the economy is going to grow X, Y, Z%, we can therefore spend money. We aren't spending money we haven't raised. We are matched our tax rises to our spending, and we are not relying on some sort of magic growth. We expect that our policies will lead to growth, but we're not depending upon that to pay for the things that we think need to change in our public services.
As I said before, because it's a follow-up of the question before, the economy is actually what the plan that we've had, to this future plan, to be responsible and to be sensible for the household budget, is already working. The inflation has gone down from 11% to 3%. But what we have also pledged is cutting the national insurance for self-employed. We've made cuts for pensioners. We've made cuts for... we're not trying to tax education like Labour would do if they were to come in. And to the point of the Lib Dems, I think the fiscal study was about the Lib Dems today, Sarah, and about how are you going to actually raise all this money. But it's pointless, because if you're not going to win this election, you can promise whatever you want. But the reality is, how are you going to raise all this money? How are you going to make sure that without being responsible, without being fair, you talk about taxing tech companies, so you talk about taxing the future of the competitive future of our economy. You talk about giving local councils the opportunity to tax up to 500% people that own a second house. So it's almost like a tax on aspiration for the future. So there are a lot of things that we could be doing, but what we should be doing is making sure that we are responsible and we keep sticking to the plan where we know that we have to be fair with people. We have been through a lot in the last 5 years. And just to take on what Laura said about the 14 years of Conservative government, I do disagree. We haven't been 14 years in this situation. We went through a worldwide pandemic, we went through Ukraine, we went through a lot lately, so that is why we are in this situation. The NHS, for example, has faced an unprecedented crisis that wasn't before the pandemic. So, and we have inherited the waiting lists from the Labour government in 2010. So it is very easy to blame the Conservative Party on everything, but the reality is inflation is down to 2%. The reality is the plan is working, and we have been cutting taxes.
So firstly, just to say that I don't think Putin was behind Liz Truss's mini budget or Boris Johnson's many debacles, but I'll move on to the question first. So Labour has many plans when it comes to tax and raising the amount of money that we need to pay for our pledges. Everything in the manifesto is fully costed, fully funded. Anything that went into the manifesto had to pass two metrics. Firstly, can we deliver it? And secondly, can we pay for it? So everything in there we know we can pay for. We'll pay for the pledges by doing things like closing tax loopholes, ensuring non-DOMs are no longer allowed to escape inheritance tax by using overseas wealth trusts, and introducing the windfall tax, like Sarah spoke about earlier, on huge profits made by the energy giants that we just think is not fair at all. Labour also has one of the lowest spendings of all the parties, so we're being really pragmatic, making sure that we put the economy first. You probably have heard on social media, Labour's said if you could sum up the manifesto in 2 words, it would be economic stability. So that is #1 priority for Rachel Reeves if she were to become the next Chancellor. But we'll also focus on making efficiencies, like in the NHS, for example. I had to get an X-ray not that long ago, and I had to wait for the hospital to be able to post the X-ray results to my GP because for some reason they couldn't do emails to each other, which is obviously not the fault of the GP or the hospital, but it's just getting that infrastructure in place so that we can make our public services more efficient. And lastly, if I've got time, just want to talk about, there's lots of things that Labour will do to build jobs, like through Great British Energy, for example, which will be creating the UK's first publicly owned green energy source, and that will create 500,000 jobs throughout the country, which will help to boost the economy as well.
Well, there is a climate and nature emergency, and we all know that there needs to be investment in doing something about that. The Green Party's plans take into account that the scale of the challenge, and we've got, as I mentioned earlier, a wealth tax concept that we are intending to bring in if we were elected. 1% on £10 million and above of assets, 2% on £1 billion and above, and that would fund not just what we're doing in climate terms, but in terms of funding the NHS and funding free social care as well. A carbon tax, yes, on pollution, regularizing NI contributions in line with income tax and also capital gains tax reform. And again, like everybody here, I suppose I'd say the same thing. We've looked at what is required. We've looked at how we can get the revenue to do what we need to do in all of these areas in terms of greening the economy, in terms of affordable housing as well. And these are the sums as they stand. And yes, there's a certain amount of realism that has to be put in there. Can we really raise this funding? Is it really possible? Well, we've also taken that into account and said, okay, there might be some difficulties in achieving this, but I can only say this is the way that we're looking at it. This is what we believe we can do because we have to do it, not just because it would be slightly desirable.
Well, I think this is such an important issue, the tax versus growth of the economy, because partly what I think I'm hearing might be described as jam tomorrow in terms of all this extra money is going to come from growth. Well, it has to be said that the UK has been fairly unsuccessful at that recently. So how are you going to grow the economy? Start with you, Laura.
So there's lots of things that Labour's going to do to grow the economy. We're going to bring back, for example, banks to our high streets, make sure that those high streets are the thriving parts of our communities. We're making sure that we have a proper working strategy so that employers have good relationships with their employers, have more money in their pockets, can spend in those communities that we're going to make sure are more thriving. Also just making sure our public services are working, so for example by re-nationalising the railways so that the trains run on time so we can get to work and not have to worry about our future. So there's lots of things that we're going to change, investing in public services being the #1 and making sure that our public services work. For example, having 40,000 more appointments in our GPs each week will all help as well. So yeah, lots of different ones, as well as all of the strategies and policies that I mentioned in the previous question.
The point behind my question, if I can be so bold, is that in order to generate all this lovely money to spend in growing the economy, effectively you have to have businesses that generate the revenue which the government can then tax. And I think probably the audience, I'm looking round, wants to hear how you propose to put us in that position.
I think also the question itself is in a way maybe based on the wrong assumptions in terms of just because we haven't been able to grow the economy well in the last 14 years doesn't mean that we can't be more ambitious in the next 5 or more years. Doesn't mean that, Labour's policies won't result in those increases in growing the economy. We've seen before under Labour that the economy has grown, and we can see it again as well. By all of the policies that I mentioned earlier. Well, I'd love to speak to you afterwards to talk in more depth about the kind of support. But, Labour's policies, we have a lot in the manifesto.
Now, excuse me, sir. The floor will have its chance in due course, but I think let the candidates answer the questions, and perhaps, Laura, you'd pass on to Sarah.
Just quickly before then, I run a small social enterprise myself, a small business, so I do understand. There's lots in the manifesto about specific support for small businesses. So yeah, it's definitely on Labour's priorities. So.
Right. Sarah.
Just to reiterate the point that I made earlier, the spending plans that we've set out in our manifesto specifically do not rely on growth. We have, as I said, it's a fully costed manifesto. We've already identified the sources of revenue that are going to pay for the things that we want to pay for. But on the topic of growth, we've got a range of different things that are important to us that we think can be done within the next Parliament to really boost growth in the UK economy. We're the only party that's committing to rejoining the single market, and it's absolutely essential from day one that we start rebuilding that relationship with our European trading partners, that the Conservatives have so badly trashed. Not just, obviously Brexit has happened, but what I'm talking about is the deal that the Conservatives negotiated post-Brexit, and also just the continued conflict that they seem to want to create between us and our European partners. We've urgently got to address that. We want to see, for a start, a veterinary agreement. We want to see mutual recognition of professional qualifications. We need a youth mobility scheme. So all of those things we can start doing when we can work towards rebuilding a relationship that can end in us rejoining the single market. We really want to see an industrial strategy in this country. It is too piecemeal. Different bits of government don't know what the other bits are doing. We are not directing investment effectively. We are not sending the right signals to private investors, and people who want to invest in our country don't know what it is that the government plans to do next. We've had so much chopping and changing on things like tax. People simply don't know what the government's plans are. We need to we need to put together a proper long-term industrial strategy so that people can feel confident about investing. We need to invest in skills. That's absolutely critical. We want to reform the apprenticeship levy. That's really, really urgent. But also we want to encourage young people at every stage of their educational career and afterwards to really think about taking up those apprenticeships. There's been a real a drop in numbers taking up apprenticeships. We urgently need to understand why and address that, and not just young people. I take issue with what Sarah was saying about Zahra, I beg your pardon, about being too old, and I don't know how old you are, to do an MA. That is absolutely not the case. You can do an MA at any time in your life, and you really should, because you'll need to retrain throughout your career. And finally, our plans for renewable energy means that businesses and households everywhere can cut their energy bills, and that will also boost growth.
Right. Sarah and then Chaz.
I'm not going to tell you how old I am, though. No. Maybe after this, in private. I think what we should be talking is real taxes and what we have, real numbers of what we are planning to do. I think that was the question. And I think the Conservative government has been very successful in extending, for example, the 75% tax cut on business rates for eligible hospitality and retail businesses. But also we've got around 700,000 of them that are actually eligible to a complete tax cut for hospitality and retail businesses. But not just that. It's about, as Laura was saying, it's about the future, is about taxes, about what do we expect from the future.
Sorry, and forgive me for interrupting you, but actually the supplementary I posed was, how is your party proposing to grow the economy? Okay.
And just to speak about what the future, talking about the future, bringing that, and the future is about the next generation, the talents. What are we actually showcasing? Are we being enough for our next generation? And I think we are, because we have delivered 5.8 million apprenticeship since 2010, and we've pledged for another 100,000 each year for the next term. And just to give you an idea, we always think that Germany, for example, has one of the highest occupational rates on apprenticeship, and that is not true. The UK, that number is 70%. So 70% of our occupations are held by apprenticeship. You can access it with apprenticeship. And that's what the future looks like. So as Conservatives, we stand for low taxation, we stand for free markets, we stand for no tax on education, no tax on aspiration, and having the opportunity, and that is why I am standing for Parliament, that democracy, freedom, but with conviction and integrity, with being responsible, without lying to people, without saying, we will promise this, we will promise that, we will deliver this is how we're going to cost it. No, the reality is we have been through a lot. We had to make some difficult decisions. We've made that, but it's paying off.
It's a great question about growth as a concept as well. You know, do we need growth? Can we move into a sustainable kind of economy without growth? If we do have growth, in what sectors would it be? I mean, the Green Party wants to obviously support green technology, research and development, renewables, also boosting community renewables that get buy-in from the local community. We also want to support small and medium-sized enterprises and also help councils to do that. Sometimes it's the best way of helping a local economy is to support the local authority to be able to do that. In tax systems need to be reviewed. It's not probably an easy thing to do, but we do need to look at income tax and business rates as well, and VAT, and see where we should be making changes. Just to think about how in the US they've had the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a Green New Deal Act, and that's been very successful in boosting the economy. So it's possible to grow the economy. We know, I mentioned how big the green economy is at the moment, and obviously there is room for growth there. And our plans are based not necessarily on some wild prediction of growth, but on what the economy stands at the moment and what we hope to be able to use to manipulate each part of it.
Well, the part of the question that nobody's answered yet is that how much of the bill for all your plans is going to be passed on to local authorities, and will they meet them from council tax increases? Because I think I'm right in saying that no party has yet said that it's not going to permit increases to council tax. And all governments have a habit, I would add, of imposing new statutory duties which the wretched councils are supposed to carry out with declining support.
Can I answer this question?
Yes, okay.
The journey of my life has always been about being pragmatic and being a problem solver and talking about facts, not what we want to hear. And I think if we're talking about facts, the 8 years of Conservative local council, we froze council tax. And in the last 5 years that we've had a Lib Dem council, we've had a maximum increase of council tax. So I think that's the answer to your question.
And I think, Labour will try to make sure that council tax is as low as possible and that no, costs roll on to the working person. Labour's already said multiple times it won't raise things like national insurance or the VAT bans, for example. But it is a really difficult situation that we're currently in, and we want to make sure that all of our promises are truthful, then we can keep them. So we're going to have to see, how growth kind of continues. If we were to get into government, then we will have to see how our plans go, and we will try and keep things like council tax as low as possible, but we also want to deliver the changes to society and the public services that we hope to see.
So you're not saying you're not increasing council tax?
I mean, I can't say anything the Labour Party hasn't said nationally, but yeah, I mean, I would always try and keep them as low as possible, but it depends on how the situation goes. Just want to be as truthful and honest as possible.
Okay, well, Sarah.
The two biggest pressures on local authority budgets, and this is true nationwide, but it is also true in Richmond and in Kingston, the two biggest pressures are social care for adults and housing. Currently, and I'm speaking to both local councils recently, the cost of temporary housing for families who can't afford to rent privately across both boroughs is the largest it's ever been, and it's causing huge, huge pressures on local authority budgets. So to respond to your question, we aren't proposing any particular changes around around the way that national government influences local council tax, but what we are doing is proposing that national government can pay for free personal care for adults, and also we are proposing a much more ambitious housing programme, particularly with 150,000 homes for social rent a year. So once those policies have had the possibility of impacting, then that will take a lot of pressure off local council budgets. As I say, those are two things at the moment are really, really, that's what's really driving a lot of the difficulties in local authorities. So it's about tackling those issues at source, which our manifesto commits to doing.
Yeah, I have to echo what Sarah said about council tax and councils, because we have statutory duties as a council, as you referred to. So there's not very much leeway here for reduction. 40% of Richmond Council's outgoings are on adult social care. And that's not going to change, is it? We've got a demographic that is only going to require that to continue or potentially even increase. And so the idea of bringing in free adult social care is obviously going to help to alleviate that burden. Council tax bans, Green Party wants to reevaluate council tax bans to reflect the changes in value since the 90s. I don't think it's really been reevaluated at all. But really what we're pushing for is a different kind of taxation system anyway, that we realise that taxing work is a disincentivization of work. We realise that land value is really where we should be taxing people so that we get a fair idea of tax.
Okay, well, I think we're probably going to have to speed up because I'm conscious that people want to ask questions from the floor. But anyway, we've touched a bit on public services, and so there's a question on public services and efficiency. And the question is, rather than throwing more money at our broken public services, how will your party make them operate more efficiently for less money, e.g. the NHS, prisons, courts, etc., etc.? Do you want to go first, Chaz?
What was that? Rather than throwing money at public services, was that the question?
Yes.
Rather than throwing money at them. Well, I think that privatisation has been a complete failure, hasn't it? Looking at the water companies and how they've performed so badly, Thames Water in particular, that has shown how privatisation would be an absolute disaster. If we were to privatise the NHS, for instance, if that is the drift of the question, which I'm not sure.
No, I don't think it is. I think the question is, how would you make the public services work more efficiently? Or can you make them work more efficiently without throwing money at them, or more money at them?
That's a great question. No, I don't think you can make them work more efficiently without putting more investment in, because that's simply the requirement that we have for more staff. We need to keep staff. We need to keep our doctors and our nurses, so we have to make sure that they're paid properly. We have to bring in social care workers who are well paid as well. So I think it's pretty inevitable that we will have to spend money in order to make the system work. I can't really see any other way around it.
Okay. Do you want to go next?
I think it's a very good question, and I believe that, for example, on the NHS, it's fairly impossible not to spend money in it, and that is why we have increased the funding to 1/3 in real time since 2010. But there are some things that we can do, and I'm very, very passionate about that. For example, as I said before, AI. We could use the use of AI, that's something that will not cost money, and will make sure that will increase the profitability. For example, one of the things that we have been very successful in the NHS and hasn't come out yet is introducing the 10,000 virtual wards. And what that means is you have the opportunity to be treated as a patient in your own home by being linked to a monitor that is in your house, and then you've got a community nurse and a community doctor that comes around and makes the rounds, or comes if you've got an emergency. And that's something that removes away pressure from the NHS. And if that removes pressure from the NHS, removes pressure, fiscal pressure, and then removes pressure from people that have to pay taxes. So there are so many things that we could be doing that are our future, but ultimately we have to be, as I said before, we have to be fair to people, and that is why we have to be also responsible. We need to make sure that we understand that when we speak, for example, about, I know Laura uses this word quite a lot, free childcare, free meals, free everything. There is nothing for free. Everything is government funded and ultimately is taxpayers' money. It's important to reiterate this because everything comes from our hard work, and the government exists, and it's a very difficult decision to how a government can translate this hard work into law and being responsible and respectful in doing that by using new technologies. So yes, I would look into new technologies for sure.
Okay.
So I think it is possible to pay public service workers fairly and with respect, and also make public services themselves more efficient, which is definitely what Labour's hoping to do. Also with policies like the free school meals or free breakfast club schemes is about, helping kids to concentrate more in their classes, to get better grades, to then be able to go on and, deliver back to the economy more. So it's all about kind of paying that forwards and thinking about the future as well. And there's lots of ways that Labour will help public services and to help public services be more efficient. Like, for example, bringing back the family doctor system so that, you won't waste time getting to know your doctor every single time you have an appointment with them, and they'll know your kind of family medical history that will help them to figure out what kind of care is best for you. And that will hopefully save a lot of time and, save any misdiagnosis as well. Putting mental health hubs into primary and secondary schools will also take pressures off of teachers. At the moment, I know so many teachers that are having to be, food banks for their kids, as well as so many emotional support. So they need that extra support in order to work more efficiently. Ending this VIP fast lane track for procurement processes, which will really help to make us more efficient and make sure that all of the public money that we're spending goes on really beneficial schemes that we know we can deliver. And having neighbourhood police in communities as well is another way that Labour will make public services more efficient, so that neighbourhood police know everyone, they know what's going on, and it's just a much more straightforward and efficient way to organise policing itself. So there's lots of things we can do, as well as paying people fairly and making sure that we have a fair system.
Right. Sarah.
Yes, just specifically around the NHS, there's a lot we can do, I think, to improve the efficiency, and that we're talking about in our manifesto. Our main thing is around GPs. We want to recruit or retain a further 8,000 GPs, because that will really open up the number of appointments. But we do that by treating them fairly, paying them properly, attracting them into the profession, but then retaining them. Too many are leaving at the moment, and that's really causing a problem. But if we can improve primary care, improve the care that people are getting from their GPs, if we can widen access to primary care to include things like pharmacists and nurse prescribers, that will make a big difference in terms of people being able to access that first point of healthcare, and that will do a lot to keep people out of hospital. And the other issue that hospitals are currently facing is that it's too difficult to discharge people when they've finished their treatment, because there's nowhere to send them. And we've got a really, really comprehensive plan for social care, free social care for adults, paying care workers properly, again, contribution to inefficiency than a constantly changing workforce. That really does slow everybody down. We want to invest in buildings in the NHS, we want to invest in the technology. There is so much, and I'm sure we all see it every day, that can be done to bring the kind of technology the NHS are using into the 20th century. The diagnostic tools, about which we're probably mostly a bit unaware, but also obviously the frontline tools, the administrative tools, and so on and so forth. Just to pick up, Laura was mentioning the police, very similar. We want to see a return to neighbourhood policing, and it's exactly, as she said, that knowledge of the local community and the local neighbourhood that local police can bring, that again will just make it more efficient. And also, I believe, it will reduce the amount of antisocial behaviour and low-level criminality, just that presence, and that in itself will just make everything run more smoothly.
Well, that very nicely leads on to the next subject, which is carers. And by way of background, Carers UK estimates that unpaid carers are already saving the economy around 162 billion per year, and there's a national shortage of paid carers. Many paid carers are recruited from Africa and Asia under sponsorship schemes which cost the carers substantial fees, and where the cost of living, housing, travel, etc., is not covered by their wages. So the question for the candidates is, what is each party's plan to recruit, train, and retain properly paid, truly caring and efficient carers going forward? How will this be funded, and does it affect your party's immigration policy? So, who'd like to start?
Well, I'm happy to start. I've mentioned carers a little bit already in my previous responses, which I think demonstrates the seriousness with which we, as Liberal Democrats, take this particular issue. And if you've seen our party election broadcast featuring our leader, Ed Davey, you will know that this is a very personal issue for him. He was a young carer for his mother, and now he's a carer for his disabled son. And he has experienced what it's like to be a carer throughout his life. And he knows as well just the myriad obstacles that carers face day in, day out to get the right support that they need for their loved ones. And that's why he's absolutely passionate about this issue, and he wants to be able to fix it. So I've talked a little bit already about free personal care and really boosting the workforce, the social care workforce, particularly by improving the wages that are available. And that's absolutely got to be the first thing that we do, but also for unpaid carers, for family carers, making sure that they can access the funds that they need. And we would increase carers' allowance and introduce a statutory guarantee of respite breaks to really, really recognise the value that the carers are bringing to our economy, but also obviously to their own loved ones at home. So, we've got a really, really substantial offering on social care. You asked about immigration. Our social care policy doesn't exactly dovetail with our immigration policy. We've got a range of things we're proposing on that. What I would say is if we are offering better wages for social care, we don't need to be so dependent upon people who are prepared to work for lower wages, who often do come from overseas. The other thing I would say, though, is that we would, with regard to our immigration policy, we would enable asylum seekers to work. Currently, they're prevented from working, they're stuck in hotels in this constituency for months at a time, years, while they're waiting for their asylum applications to be heard. And I've seen this for myself. People come to my surgeries. If people were allowed to work while they were waiting, not only would that drastically improve the quality of their life and their mental health, it would also be a huge boost to our local economy. And so that's something that we are advocating for.
Yes, indeed. Yes, carers and all of that unpaid care. Well, the Green Party has an idea called the universal basic income, and that would replace most of the benefit system, and it would give every carer or anyone who wants to work flexibly a means of doing that. So it would be a basic income, as the name suggests, and that would free up carers, parents, and people who need to work part-time but can't at the moment afford to do that because of the current benefit system. So that's one idea that we're very keen to see trialled, as it has been in several countries pretty successfully. We'd also look at the whole career structure and try and boost that sector for care workers so that we have good training and a good career path for young people and qualifications as well, and change the working visa system to end the exploitation of overseas workers in the care sector so they don't get charged commission by agents and be in the situation that was described there. So yeah, okay, a kind of mixture of some bigger ideas and smaller ideas.
Laura.
So the first thing to say about this is that Wes Streeting has said that we need a cross-party strategy which goes beyond just one parliamentary term to solve the carer crisis. It is a crisis, and it's something that is increasingly important, and it's something that we all need to work together on. So he's really, really keen to do that. It's one of the only parts of his policies that he is wanting to do that for. So it just shows how important it is to him. We haven't said, similar to Sarah, we haven't said in the manifesto whether carers would influence our immigration policy, but Keir Starmer has said that he will look to have stronger economic ties with Europe and diplomatic ties. And of course, Labour would also focus on making sure we have early diagnoses and early assessments of support that people need, which can hopefully help us to plan for people's caring needs properly so that they get the support they need when they need it. So, yeah.
On cares, this is something quite personal to me because my mum is a doctor and she works in a care facility, so she's dedicated her entire life on this. So this is something that I'm quite passionate and is very personal to me. And I would look incredibly hard to actually, I think one of the things that should happen is government and local councils have and strengthen their relationship on how to handle carers in the constituency. And I would love to use my voice as, if I am lucky enough to be your MP one day, as to influence as much as possible government on this. On immigration, I think we have to be incredibly fair to people. And that is why we have been talking about net migration and putting a cap on it, because everything costs money and we need to make sure that we understand how much will this affect the economy, which is the reason why the Conservative government has set up a plan on immigration and on a net cap immigration, on giving the opportunity to independent researchers to see how much the economy can handle, as in public services, school, and everything else. And then once they set up the cap on migration, it goes through Parliament and through the MP that represents the area to give their voice and vote for or against it. And I think that's an incredibly diplomatic and democratic process, and I'm very happy to see that happening. But for example, on immigration, I would like to bring the example of Ukraine, which we have been incredibly generous at. We've introduced unlimited visa for Ukrainian people coming during the war, and we've given funds to the council, for example, to accommodate the extra children in the schools. This is the type of government, and this is the type of country that we are, that when we are asked to get together, we go back to our core values and we bring them out, and we're there for people that they need it. But everything has to be fair to people, and generosity has a limit. And if that means having to look after also the safety of this country, I think it's fair enough, given the fact that I do come from a country where I never had safety, that we give them to the next generation and we make sure that we can help who needs it, but at the same time we can help this country to be safe.
Well, the audience will judge whether the candidates have answered the question. Now, the one that you've all been waiting for, because it was touched on earlier, and I think of the questions that we had submitted, it was the one that got the most different questions. Brexit. Has Brexit delivered the expectations you had in 2016, and how do you and your party plan to work with the EU? And if you feel you've answered the question in part, you don't need to repeat it again. So, Sarah.
let me start by saying that Brexit was a very painful decision for a lot of people in this room, probably. There is no mystery that almost 76% of the constituency voted Remain, so we need to acknowledge it. But as I said, it was a democratic vote. People were asked to make a very difficult decision, and they made it. Now, one of the things that I've always been quite capable, and I'm hoping to pass it to the next generation, to my two beautiful children eventually, is making sure that they never give up, regardless of what happened in the past. Because you can dwell on it, you can cry on it, or you can make the best out of it. And that's exactly what I think should happen with Brexit. There's no point in going back to 8 years ago, as much as it was painful for some people in this room. But what I would like to say is that since Brexit had happened, we have secured 73 deals with different nations worth £1.1 trillion to this economy, to the UK. We've also, for example, something that Laura is very proud, and she's rightful to be so, she's been an activist on the periods tax, on the tampon tax. And one of the reasons why we were able to do that is because we left the European Union and because of Brexit. So, but not just that, we have been able to actually strengthen the laws on environment, on animal welfare. We have given our farmers around £165 million. So we have done a lot, and there is much to do, and we need to invest in our partners. There is nothing against the European country. It's very accommodating. We are one of the biggest partners on security and investigation. We are one of the leaders. I've hosted the Minister for Security, Tom Tugendhat, a couple of weeks ago here in Richmond, and he was a Remainer. So we had a very long conversation on this and how incredibly good is the relationship with Europe on investigation and security. We are one of the countries that invests more in security and investigation. We're one of the biggest leaders in the EU, even if we're not part of the EU anymore. So I think, as I said, it was a very painful decision, but we must get the best out of it now. Right, Laura.
I do think Brexit is one of those good questions that kind of divides us all quite clearly. So hopefully you'll have a clear choice to make. So with Labour, we respect the referendum, although of course Labour campaigned to Remain. I was I was an organiser for Labour's Remain campaign. So obviously we're very sad about the results, but we do feel like the referendum has happened and we need to respect the referendum that has happened. Similarly, if we had voted to Remain and then it was rehashed, at this point...
Well, I think the main part of the question is not so much looking back, but is focusing perhaps on how you're going to work with the EU. Yeah,
so... the ways we're going to work with the European Union is to stay in the European Court of Human Rights, for example, and other big, very important institutions within Europe. We'll work with the European Union economically. Ever closer economic ties with the European Union is only good for us and good for Europe as well. And we'll work with the European Union to strengthen our borders and security forces in terms of the border security as well. It's a really important topic, important for me. I feel European. My parents live in Portugal. My dad's Greek. My brother-in-law is French, or maybe soon to be anyway. So yeah, it is important to me, definitely, and I know all of us in the room will feel European as well. So something I would love to champion further in Parliament if I was an MP.
Sarah.
Well, I personally and the party I represent have always been unequivocally in favour of remaining in the European Union. Obviously, we continue to regard it as an absolute disaster that we left, and also the way that the Conservative government has pursued very, very anti-Europe policies ever since then. The post-Brexit deal has been a complete disaster for our economy. I've talked about that already, but I think it's important also to reflect on the damage that's been done to our cultural life. So many of our artists, our orchestras can't tour, and our authors are prevented from travelling to book fairs overseas. And also, and increasingly importantly, diplomatically. And it feels as if, this is an increasingly dangerous world, and we have lost the ability to influence at a very, very critical time on the world stage. There are so many different ways that Brexit has made us poorer and weaker and less well regarded in the world. And whatever the Liberal Democrats can do in the next Parliament to advocate a closer relationship with Europe, to bring down some of those trading obstacles that we have deliberately placed in our way, to recommit, and I think this is the most important thing, recommit to those shared values that we share with our European partners and also with our friends in the States in the face of increasing challenges. And that is so, so, so important. And there are so many intangible things that we've lost by leaving the European Union, and not just leaving, you know, the political structures of the European Union, but leaving behind the partnership that was implied across so many other different areas. So it's an absolute tragedy, but it's not too late to reverse some of the damage, and that is something I very much hope that the Liberal Democrats will be looking to influence in the next Parliament, and I really hope to see some progress on that.
Well, international cooperation is a key value for the Green Party, and in particular, looking at environmental protection, I don't agree, Sarah, that the Conservatives have made the environmental protections stronger through recent legislation. They wanted to put a bonfire of legislation, and that is just not really what we need. You know, we need international cooperation across borders because, as we know, the environment does not have borders. We need to have stronger criteria for measuring air quality. We need to have a better agricultural policy as well. This is not going to happen just in isolation. We know that. So the Green Party has a commitment, like the Liberal Democrats, to rejoin the single market, but also to rejoin the EU in time when it becomes, well, actually when they'll have us back, because who knows how they feel about it. I think there's been a lot of damage done to international relations, and who knows really whether they will. I've lived in several other European countries before, and just having that opportunity to live and work abroad was something I took for granted, and something that I took for granted for my kids. And now they don't have that opportunity, and obviously everybody's children no longer has that opportunity, and the Galileo and training and skills courses are not there anymore. So, you know, I think it's been pretty disastrous, and we'd want to reverse it.
I think unfortunately, we've got quite a lot of questions still. We haven't opened up to the floor. So whilst the debate between the candidates would probably be quite illuminating, I don't really think we've got time for that. I suppose the comment on hearing what everybody said in relation to the EU is it takes two to tango. Foreign policy, that attracted some comments. So the question is, what should the next British government's foreign and defence policy be, especially considering the Palestinian-Israel crisis and the Ukraine war? So let's start with Sarah.
Sorry, we have been very clear on this. We have increased we said that we increased our defence budget by 2.5% of the GDP because of what we're facing nowadays. And on Israel and Palestine, coming from a personal experience where I did escape a war it wasn't an invasion, but it was still a civil war. And there is something about the war that just follows you forever. Is about the sound of the siren, or is about the fact that I used to, I remember sleeping next to my mum with an AK-47 next to her to protect her children. And those sounds and those experiences never leave you, but it's also because of those sounds and those experiences that they shape what you will become in the future and why you want to enter the decision-making table. And Israel and Palestine is a very hot topic. Both countries have been through so much. It is with Hamas now, they have the deal on their table, and I pray to God every day, thinking about the children that are suffering in between, that they will accept the deal so that we can release the hostages, we can flood humanitarian need, so much needed humanitarian need, and then move towards a ceasefire and eventually, finally, for a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living together peacefully, not just for the sake of the two countries, but for the sake of the region and the entire world. Because I think it's fair to remember to all of us this evening, especially because of my journey, that there are more things that unify us than the one that divides us. And we must protect them, we must hold into it in order to build a lasting, peaceful world.
Laura.
So in terms of foreign policy generally, the Labour Party has said that we will increase our defence spending as relation to GDP by 2.5%. And generally, I think just we need more leadership in the world on foreign policy issues. We need more people trying to stand up for what's right, not trying to make cheap jibes to get votes like we've seen in Donald Trump, for example, in America. We need someone to really stand up and be the leader that we want to see make the change in the world. And I do think that Keir Starmer would be an amazing leader on foreign policy. He's spent 5 years as head of the Crown Prosecution Service. He's been acting on anti-terrorism for many, many years. He's got really, really good experience in this and in diplomacy as well. So I think he will make a big difference on the international stage. And then finally on Israel and Palestine, this is obviously a heartbreaking situation. I've personally been to Israel. I've been to the Palestinian territories as well. The atrocities that happened on the 7th of October were obviously not acceptable in any way. However, we've seen that Israel's counter strikes have even failed their own metrics. People in Israel do not feel safer, and we've seen not enough hostages being released either. And then we've seen the humanitarian disaster in so many areas of Palestine.
But forgive me, what is your party's policy
on Israel-Palestine? So
that's the question
Keir
for all of you.
Starmer has called for a ceasefire. And a sustained ceasefire, which is what we all want, and we can all agree on that. And he said that we need a sustainable two-state solution as well, but we'll only do that if we can see and have the leadership that we need to be able to, push forward these discussions internationally. So we all want the same thing here. We just need to make sure we get there with the right kind of tact internationally.
Right, Chance.
Yes, well, just on Gaza, and I've got to pick you up on this, Sarah, something you said earlier. It was, in fact, the Green Party was the first party to call for an immediate and bilateral ceasefire and permanent ceasefire. Obviously, in Gaza, everybody wants a solution. We want a permanent and durable solution that respects the security and equal rights for both sides. I think peacekeeping is a key aspect that no one's really been mentioning. How do we create peace in a fractured world? How do we contribute to international solutions? We've got to put more effort into peacekeeping. We've got to be able to say, yeah, okay, there's a crisis. We need to put our resources together, pool them with our international partners, and move towards peaceful solutions. So, in a nutshell, peacekeeping would be the solution.
I think the main principle for the Liberal Democrats when considering foreign policy is that we want to reflect our own democratic values, project them around the world, and defend other countries, other democratic countries, when their democratic values are under attack. We've got a number of different issues that we think are important. Firstly, we want to restore the international aid budget. It should be 0.7% of GDP. We also need to live by our own values. There can't be any more undermining of international treaties or international law, as we have seen with the Conservative government. We need to re-establish our role on the world stage. I've talked about that a little bit already. By re-establishing our relationships with Europe, we need to continue to stand with the people of Ukraine. That's very important to me personally. I'm still playing host to a Ukrainian national in my home, and she continues to be very welcome. With the Israel-Gaza conflict, I'm sorry if we weren't quite the first, but we certainly from a very early stage were calling for an immediate bilateral ceasefire. There's no, we want to lead a diplomatic push. We want the UK to lead a diplomatic push towards a two-state solution. And we have said that we would officially recognise the independent state of Palestine with immediate effect. We think that's a really important stand to take in order to achieve that goal. And I think also important thing to say in relation, I suppose, to immigration, as we were talking earlier on, we want to see safe and legal routes for refugees. The situation as it is at the moment in terms of asylum seekers in this country is unsustainable. And it is solvable, but the political will needs to be about supporting safe and legal routes so that the processing of asylum applications can be much more effectively managed.
Well, we've touched a bit on housing, but we haven't really had a question on environment, so there's one coming up. The first part is we need more housing, particularly well-designed, affordable housing, especially for key workers who are often low paid, and this requires improved infrastructure. Schemes are frequently blocked because of local opposition. How will the parties, candidates, resolve this conflict to deliver the homes that are needed? So that's the first part. The second is, what concerns do candidates have about the impact of development on biodiversity, and what actions will they take to help people make the changes necessary to meet the target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050? And the third one, which I suspect you might all agree on, is the Thames Water's direct river abstraction is designed to send water to new housing in the Lee Valley, possibly without any local planning review. Would you intervene to protect the Ham lands or keep the water flowing to East End taps? So who wants to go first? Chaz, it's an environment question, so how about you?
Yeah, I'm struggling with the fact that there are 3 questions.
Yeah.
Here that I've got to
Sorry
try
about
and
that.
Keep my eye on that ball. The first one was about housing and if they, opposition, local people being in opposition to housing. Well, that's probably because local people aren't necessarily involved at an early stage of a development, and developers. I think the onus is on developers, but also on local councils. I know that Richmond Council have recently started to introduce a new engagement process for developers. That means that at an earlier stage, developers will be able to present their plans to the local community and get local buy-in, or maybe not, you know, depending on what the response is. But certainly engaging early is bound to be a much better idea than engaging late or not at all. So, I mean, that's one thing. It's basically opening it up to the local communities for their views and actually seeing, you know, how you can work together to get the results that you want. Biodiversity and net zero, I'm not totally sure where that came from. Is it something to do with renewable energy impacting on biodiversity? I'm not really sure how the two things have been linked in the questioner's mind, but... Yeah. Oh, if you're building no housing. Oh, right, okay. Okay, how can you promote it?
Well, I think behind it is the fact that if we're going to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, given that our housing stock is old by most European standards, older housing stock is going to have to be modernised. And at the moment, probably the take-up isn't great because of the expense. So it's that angle.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, sure, absolutely. Well, Green Party's plans are to, you know, put much more funding into retrofitting. So we retrofit the existing housing stock. So that's a priority. It obviously would be. You know, with the Green Party, we want to produce an energy efficiency housing stock that will save people energy and obviously save money. The Thames Water's direct river abstraction plan. Well, I mean, I live in Ham, so you know, I've talked to the Save Our Lands and River guys who are there campaigning amazingly well against this particular plan because it doesn't make any sense. It would be damaging. There must be other solutions. Thames Water need to look at water efficiency as well as simply assuming that you need to pipe water across London, which to most people must be absolutely absurd that we're piping water across from, Teddington.
So I take it that your answer is you would intervene to prevent it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I am intervening in a way already by campaigning, by talking about it, by supporting those residents who have already expressed their opposition.
I'm conscious of time moving on, and we haven't taken questions from the floor, so that's why I'm chivying all of you along. Right, who's next? Sarah.
I think we should, in Richmond Park, we should build the right houses in the right places. We should prioritise building on brownfield land instead of actually paving our countryside, and fast-tracking city developments and protecting. One of the reasons why we live in Richmond Park, one of the reasons we're so passionate about our green spaces is because we want to protect that. So we must preserve and protect our green belt, that's for sure. One of the things that this government has done is, for example, introduce for the first time since 2017, the stamp duty relief, and we've increased the threshold to £425,000 for the next Parliament. But we have some issues in Richmond. We've got 3 major developments coming up, one in Kew, one home base on the Stack Brewery. The Stack Brewery is a complete mess at the moment. There are not enough affordable housing, and frankly, there is no plan on infrastructure or transport or whatsoever. And there has been approved, the Lib Dem Council has approved a secondary school on that, and there has been no consideration of the local community views. Now, I live in Barnes, so I've been lucky enough to live in different parts of this constituency, including South Richmond on Richmond Hill. But I live in Barnes now, and for anyone who lives on that side of the borough, we know that as things stand, we're incapable to accommodate the workload, let alone a secondary school or 1,150, whatever the number is, I can't remember now precisely, new homes. The truth is...
Forgive me, the question is how would you resolve the conflict between the need for new houses
and building the right homes in the right place, and by protecting our green belts and by prioritising brownfield lands. And that's, I am 100%. And that is linked to the second question, which is how do we protect, how do we make sure that we reach our net zero agenda as well by doing that. And that's exactly why we have to do that, because as much as one of the reasons why we backtracked on the net zero from 2030 to 2050 is exactly because we have been through a lot, and the taxpayers have been through a lot, and we have been asked to, we have been going through a very long-term fiscal responsibility. So it was only fair to make sure that we keep the promises on the net zero, but to do it in a responsible way by making sure that we do not stretch the households more than they have already been stretched. On the water companies, we have a lot to go, but there are some things that we're incredibly proud of. For example, in 2010, we were monitoring only 7% of our water companies. Now we're monitoring 100% of our water companies, and that is the only country that is doing that. But we've also introduced unlimited fines for water companies. We've asked water companies to invest up to £56 billion on environmental projects, and we've introduced unannounced inspections for water companies. So on Hamlands, absolutely against it, and I would love to see the local community have a stronger voice and have a seat on the table on that.
So the way that Labour would help to build as many homes as we need, but get the local buy-in, is by speeding up the planning process. So taking away the red tape that we currently have that makes building houses so slow, and putting the emphasis instead on what communities really want, so that communities can drive the kind of change that we need, drive the kind of homes that we need to be built in this area. I think a really good example of this is the Mortlake development brewery situation at the moment, which is really quite shocking in terms of there are international developers, I'm sure many of you will know this already, but there's international developers that have come and suggested that they will turn the Mortlake brewery into luxury flats. And 2 of their proposals have gone through the council, even though local community groups have said that the proposals will harm the Mortlake community in many, many ways, in terms of lack of green spaces.
So how are you going to resolve the conflict? I'm chasing you because we're going to have to take questions from the floor, and the longer people make speeches rather than perhaps answering the questions, the less time the floor has.
I think I might have been quite short so far, but okay. So the reason why I wanted to bring up Mortlake is because I think it's a good example of when Labour has pushed back on international developers and have listened to local communities, which is what they would do in terms of housing. So Sadiq Khan was the one person that made sure that those plans didn't go through because they don't have enough affordable housing in them to serve the local community, and they don't have enough green space and biodiversity. So Labour would reform planning so that we could focus on those community needs rather than the needs of or the wants of international developers. And then in terms of Thames Water, we will also make sure we have severe fines for those water companies and make sure that those water companies are maintaining their, water supplies. At the moment, 1/3 of the waterways under Thames Water aren't even mapped, so I'm not sure how they're supposed to be, upkeeping something that's not even mapped. So.
Well, the question was actually about the DRA. Would you intervene to stop it or not? So which is a yes or no?
Well, we'd work with Sadiq Khan on that and make sure that the waterways are as clean as possible.
Okay, Sarah.
So on the Teddington DRA, I've been campaigning really hard against this for about a year or so now. I've met the CEO of Thames Water, I've met the Minister, I've met the head of the Environment Agency, and time again I've made the case that this proposed project is not suitable. And I've really reflected local people's concerns about the effluent going into the water. I've met the amazing Teddington Blue Tits. If you don't know, they're a female swimming club. And other water users who are really concerned about the plan because of the profound change it will make to the nature of the river, particularly around Ham and Richmond. So I am feeling hopeful that the campaign, not just my campaign, but many residents across Ham, Richmond and the wider area, obviously Teddington, the other side of the river as well, it could potentially be successful. I think Thames Water thought it was going to be a very straightforward, we'll just sort of quickly consult and then we'll implement. They've realised it's going to be a lot more difficult than they thought. And they're giving early signs that they might be reconsidering, but I will continue to push really hard against that plan if I'm returned to Parliament. Just on the question about conflict between the need for housing and perhaps local campaigning against it, we need more town planners. We need more town planners in our local authorities. We need to pay them better. We need to recruit them. We need to retain them because they are absolutely essential to managing these conflicts. I think sometimes these terms development and consultation can be a little bit alienating. We need to talk in terms of what can be done to improve our local communities, our local high streets, and really challenge people who want to build in our neighbourhoods, to really answer those questions and come up with good solutions. And I do think our local planning teams in our local authorities are absolutely essential to making that happen.
Right, well, I will now throw the questions open to the floor. So, 2 things. First of all, please don't ask a question if the subject matter has already been covered. And secondly, please ask a question, don't make a speech. And there's a microphone going, so gentleman at the back.
Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. My question is on prisons, and particularly to the Conservative candidate. How embarrassed or ashamed are you of the numbers of prisoners that we have, the record numbers of prisoners, the projections that the numbers are going to increase further, and the state of our prisons?
Well, I think it might be more constructive if it was posed as what you're going to do about the state of prisons.
I think we have been very clear that we're going to invest on it and we're going to make sure that we somehow dilute it. One of the reasons why that has happened is because of the latest couple of years that we have been through, and it's also something about, it's a matter of safety and security. Just to echo what you've just said, I was on a night ride-along with the police. When I got selected, one of the first things I did was to go on a ride-along. Sorry, I'm being long here.
Well,
and that was...
Sarah, please do limit your... We've only got a quarter of an hour left, and the others need to speak, so a concise answer, I'm sure,
concise
would be
answer
appreciated.
is we should invest more in it, we should make the process smooth, and we should make sure that they are, that we're able to actually accommodate and we're able to process the prisoners in the right timings. So yes.
Laura.
Labour would build more prisons, firstly, to make sure we don't have overcrowding in the prisons at the moment, because if you have more overcrowding, then that creates a really hostile environment in prisons, and rehabilitation just becomes, less and less feasible. So we'd build more prisons, have neighbourhood policing as well to create that community feel, and that will hopefully help to resolve the prison situation.
Okay, Sarah?
What Laura said, I think, about neighbourhood policing, we need to be much more, better at preventing crime happening in the first place. We need more prison staff. We need to train them. We need to pay them better. We need to retain them. I realise this. I've said similar things about GPs and planners, but it's still important. And then we need to be much better at looking after prisoners when they have been released. And I think what we're seeing is one of the reasons our prisons are so overcrowded is because of the rate of reoffending. And we really need to focus on reducing reoffending rates. And I think that will make a big difference to our overcrowding numbers in prisons.
Yeah, we could stop locking people up for low-level offences. That would be the first thing that you can do. But also prevention. Yes, that's obviously a very key thing. And rehabilitation is really one of the Green Party's key priorities around crime. And well, rather than imprisonment, rehabilitation and restorative justice is another concept that the Green Party is much more keen on looking at rather than just simply locking people up, and with all the attendant problems that creates.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You've got the microphone, Peter.
Peter Willen, Richmond Heathrow campaign. How would each of the candidates deal with the expansion of Heathrow?
Sorry, I don't think people heard the question.
How will the candidates deal with the potential expansion of Heathrow?
Okay.
I've elected to go first. I think there's been some big changes in Heathrow's plans for third runway. Certainly post-pandemic, it appeared as if simply the money wasn't going to be on the table, and so it looked very, very unlikely. But more recently, we've heard talk from the new CEO of Heathrow that he's still committed to the project. So just as Parliament was being dissolved, I was ready to challenge the Department for Transport on that, whether or not they were planning to adjust the National Aviation Policy Statement. But I will, as soon as I'm back in Parliament, I will be, I beg your pardon, if I'm back in Parliament, whoever the new Minister for Aviation, they can expect to have that question from me waiting on their desk.
We're still opposed to Heathrow expansion. Green Party is opposed to all airport expansion. There's no point in stopping expansion in Heathrow if you just allow it to be expanded, if you allow aviation to be expanded elsewhere. So, yeah, we're absolutely opposed.
Sarah. Oh, sorry.
We've just got to balance, really, the need for Heathrow and its ability to provide jobs for people, maybe not in Richmond, but for the neighbouring constituencies, and its ability to help tourism grow in London, which obviously we'll all benefit from, with making sure that it doesn't overcrowd our airspace and noise pollution as well. So there's a balancing act to happen in terms of Heathrow expansion.
I'm very clear on this. I'm absolutely against the expansion. I'm absolutely against the expansion of the night flights. I wake up at 4:45 with my 2-year-old every morning because of the first flight, and I'm directly under the pathway of the flight. So I have been campaigning incredibly hard and strong with at the beginning with Zach when everything started, and I have been campaigning since then. I've met a couple of times with representatives from the Heathrow against the Heathrow runway expansion. I think the government has been quite clear on the fact that it is a private project, and in order to go forward, it has to meet 3 very strict criteria, and that's on air quality, noise, and climate change.
Thank you. Right, any more questions? Yes, this gentleman in the front.
Hello, I have a question. So, in regards to the NHS, I am a nurse. For example, there are overseas nurses.
Sorry, we're having a bit of trouble hearing the question.
So, in regards to the NHS, we know that there is a problem with the NHS. So, I am a nurse. In regards to, for example, overseas nurses, there is a problem, for example, like with the, I know you have the problem with NHS. The reason why I put this question is because, like, for example, on the Department of Education.
Excuse me, what's your question?
So I'm going to put the question right now. So what are you going to do, what are the candidates going to do in regards to the, for example, qualifications, which are recognized? For example, the Department of Education says that I am a nurse, but for example...
Excuse me, because I think we're having a bit of trouble understanding or hearing correctly. I think, is the question you're asking that we don't recognise foreign qualifications for people to practice in the NHS? Is that the question?
It is recognized. The problem is, like, for example, Department of Education says it, they recognize FRUNARIC. Now it's called ACTIS. And like when you go to the NMC says we don't recognize the Department of Education.
Forgive me, what you're saying is that it's inconsistent. Yeah. Okay, right, okay. Anybody want to answer that?
Just very quickly, yes, we do want to do much more to recognise foreign qualifications, precisely for the reason that you mentioned. And I think actually my constituents, the constituents, I beg your pardon, who are really struggling with this are some of our new arrivals from Hong Kong, many of who are very, very skilled in a vast range of different sectors, and particularly healthcare, but are being prevented from practicing because the particular route that they came in through, the BNO route, means that their qualifications aren't recognised. We really do need to break down those barriers, and I think it would have a very positive effect for our healthcare system in general, but obviously for individuals and people like yourself.
Chance?
Yes, I would agree that we need to equate qualifications, but we need to be careful that we know exactly what those qualifications are and how they do, how are they equivalent. And you know, beyond that, I will pass to everybody else.
Okay, Sarah or Laura or whichever.
I'm very familiar with what you're asking, and I think it's important to recognise that this country is not against the foreign NHS staff coming into the country, but what we are saying is that we have to abide by the British standards, and in order to do that, every foreign overseas person has to go through an exam to get to that qualification. That's why it goes under the Department of Education. Is that what you're asking?
But I think the question is that there is inconsistency between the various departments. So
I'm not aware. I will come back to you on this.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. We probably got a lot of other people asking questions. I think we've grasped the point that it's the inconsistency between it.
Can I just?
So
the reason why I know that is because I did help one of the residents here to get in touch with the Department of Education. He went through the exam, he comes from Mexico, and now he's a qualified dentist. So I don't think there is much of an inconsistency. But I'm happy to chat with you after this and help you on this.
Okay. Laura.
Thank you. So firstly, just to say that nurses, midwives, so important to the NHS. We need to make sure that they're protected and that there's pathways to become nurses in NHS, no matter where you come from, so long as you have the right skills. And we have so many skills gap in the NHS that we need to fill. So international qualifications, as said before, is a really, really important part of it. It's just one of the ways we can make sure that NHS is more efficient as well. And just lastly, to say that we've heard quite a lot in the news about like Mickey Mouse qualifications, which is not necessarily, it's not your qualification, but it's another way of talking about how all qualifications should be seen as valuable, whether they are apprenticeships or A-levels or any other kind of qualification in the UK. So yeah, Labour would also make sure that it would prioritise different kind of learning paths depending on what the student needs and wants.
Right, thank you. Next question.
It's on. Net immigration into the UK is 650,000 a year. What level would you like to see it at?
Yes. Do you want to go first, Sarah?
Yes, only because I think I've responded to this question before, and I think one of the reasons why we have come up with this plan of having an immigration net cap is because we will have independent bodies that will make that study and will say exactly what number, will suggest what number of immigration we can afford in this country, and that it will go down to a vote in Parliament to either vote for it or against it. So I think once we know how much we can accommodate without putting extra pressure on the household budget, I think that's the right way to do it. So I think I cannot give you a number today, but what I can say is that there is going to be an independent body, independent from the government, that will make that assessment, will bring it to Parliament, and then our members of Parliament, the Member of Parliament that you have chosen, is going to eventually have a say on it.
Sarah, do you want to...
Well, we need to see it at the right level, and I don't think it's necessarily possible to put an actual figure on that, because it will change depending on what the demand for labour is within our own economy. I know we've seen huge increases over the last few years, and I think a lot of that is to do with Hong Kongers coming in, Ukrainians, also obviously a big increase in the number of foreign students coming to study in our universities. So there are reasons why it's gone up a lot, and some of that means advantages to our country. And I know some people also, see that there are disadvantages. But as I just come back to you, there's a right number, if you like. And I think it's interesting to note that actually a lot of our economic growth, which is not very high, it's about 0.4% at the moment, but a lot of that actually is being driven by the fact that we've got net immigrants coming into the country, and that in itself provides an economic boost. However, I think, and I've said in a lot of my previous answers, we need to think about boosting the attractiveness of some of these sectors where we're recruiting from overseas, boosting the attractiveness to domestic workers, really providing the right sort of wage levels, the right terms and conditions, the right kind of career structure, so that more people, more of our domestic workforce, if you like, are motivated to take up some of those jobs that we're currently relying on people from overseas to do for us.
Right, Laura.
Right. Great. So I agree with Sarah in terms of there's no specific perfect number. It just depends on what kind of skills gap we need to fill and what kind of benefit that we need specifically from the immigration that we're looking for. The most important thing when it comes to immigration is to ending the backlog that we currently have, ending the use of hotels, which is currently costing the taxpayer £8 million a day, and making sure that the people on those waiting lists are given the dignity that they need to know what their future will hold for them as quickly as possible.
Chaz.
Slightly distracted by the phone there. Yes, yeah, I agree. There's no number that you can place on it until you know what the need is, and that need will always fluctuate. We've seen immigration levels change due to the fact that, well, because of Brexit, a lot of EU nationals have now left this country, but then they've needed to be replaced. Their jobs have needed to be replaced by people from elsewhere. So also migrants do pay taxes, so let's not forget that. So if we're worried about levels of migration and there being a drain on resources, let's not forget that they also pay their tax and their NI. But yeah, I wouldn't put a number on it. It really does depend on need.
Right, the gentleman in the front, right. And that I think has to be the last question.
Is the complaint?
Take another question. Fine, if you're quick.
I will be quick. Just let me speak. And before I ask my question, I'm going to say a very important thing. Until tonight, I never even knew your name or your name, and I'd heard next to nothing from you. I live in Lady Elizabeth House in the Lower Richmond Road. I've had no leaflets whatsoever from the Tories or the Labour. And you're the only one we've heard from. And a lot of your stuff, it just gets put in through the door, a big pile's there, it lies for 3 or 4 days and somebody throws it in the bin. Right, well listen, there's 2 questions. No, but it's serious. What kind of campaign are you running? She's going to, well, I'm not going to say. Right, so there's 2 questions. Right, just let me ask my question, right? I made a very serious point, and you listen to that if you're hoping to win the election. I haven't heard anything from you compared to Zach Goldsmith. Right.
Question.
Now, there's two questions. One is a local one. I live in Lady Elizabeth House, which is for folk mainly over 60. And a lot of these people are in poor health, and we need to live in a clean air environment. And we want to retain that part that sits right opposite Lady Elizabeth House, next to the brewery. We don't want a school or houses or flats built there. We want this environment. And then the other thing that's very, very important to me and many other pensioners, I was 70 last August. I'll be 71 the 25th of August. Now, the state pension, in my opinion, is an absolute disgrace. It's less than 11,000 a year. And I often hear you MPs talking about eliminating pensioner poverty. Well, when are you going to get the pension up to at least 15,000 a year? And what is your policy regarding the triple lock and the triple lock plus? Because there's far too many pensioners going to food banks and all that.
Excuse me.
Right, I'm going to answer you very quickly, Sarah, although I appreciate you've been waiting. And thank you for what you said about leaflets. Everyone complains they get too many leaflets from the Lib Dems, so it's nice to hear a positive comment. Just very quickly on the triple lock, it was the Liberal Democrats in coalition who introduced the triple lock, and we're committed to maintaining it because the state pension is still too low compared to both international comparators, but also general income as a proportion of the population for those people who rely exclusively on the state pension. Obviously, there will be other pensioners who've got other sources of income. We remain committed to the triple lock, certainly for the duration of the next Parliament.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you think you haven't had anything from the Green Party. You have a Green Party councillor sitting right there. And yeah, she's right there, and we have been delivering leaflets in your area. As far as pensions are concerned, I agree with you. Pension is a terribly low level, and we need to improve it.
Sarah.
I'm sorry you haven't received our leaflets. To be fair, we haven't been selected. It hasn't been a long time, and also we haven't had the time because we thought the election was going to be in October, and then it was brought up on the 4th of July. So I do apologise. I will bring you my leaflet personally if you tell me where you live, though.
No,
that said, on the
pensioners,
yes, I think we should recognize pensioners the dignity. They have worked their entire life. So what this government and any other government, the future government that might come up, should recognize them their dignity, which is the reason why we have committed to the triple lock plus by ensuring that they save up to £900.
Thank you. Yeah, you'll also be receiving free posts, I'm assuming from everyone soon, so every single house in the constituency will get leaflets from everyone through that as well. It should have already dropped, but I know it hasn't here yet, so it will in the coming days. In terms of pensions, Labour Party is also committed to the triple lock on pensions to secure that financial security for pensioners. And clean air, also really important, something that Sadiq Khan has shown real kind of leadership on in London, reduced the amount of schools, for example, with illegal levels of air pollution from 500 to 20 in his premiership, and it's something we want to do for the rest of the country as well.
Now, there's a lady there who I think...
Thank you very much.
Can you make it a quick question, please?
It's very quick, and it's nice to have one woman out of the 6 questioners. Very quick question. The Chair made a very interesting point at the beginning about we get the politicians we deserve. Did the country deserve the last 3 politicians who were the Conservative PMs? And secondly, there's only 2 contenders for Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Which one do you want to see in number 10 and why?
Well, perhaps we can focus on the second part of the question as more constructive. So, Chaz.
Well, obviously, I'd like to see a Green Party Prime Minister, but like you're saying, the choice is between Labour and Conservative nationally. So I have my criticisms of Keir Starmer, the Green Party does, but I think comparatively, we probably prefer him.
Sarah?
Well, obviously, I'm in this election because I think there's a better alternative to either Labour or Conservative. And one of the things we're really passionate about as Liberal Democrats is voting reform so that we don't have to have this forced choice between 2 parties that many people wouldn't choose. And referring to the first part of your question, I am just very committed to getting rid of this Conservative government. Obviously, that implies the choice that I'm making, but we've had enough. We've had enough of this, you know, they've taken us for granted, they've played us for fools. It is high time we got rid of these Conservatives.
You can go last, I think. Laura.
I think it's worth pointing out that last time the Liberal Democrats could choose between who they want to go to government with, either the Conservatives or Labour. They chose Conservatives, so I just want to point that out. But of course, thank you very much for the question. I would absolutely love to have Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister. He's changed the Labour Party for the best, and he can change the country for the best as well.
You've answered the question.
Of course, Rishi Sunak, I think he has been the right choice. He has been delivering a strong leadership. He has been delivering a stable and responsible leadership. So I would love to see Rishi Sunak, not just for that, but also to make sure that we don't have a VAT on independent schools.
Right, well, I'm afraid we have no more time for questions, and each candidate has 1 minute to summarise why we should vote for him or her. So, starting with Chaz.
Yeah, as we just heard, there seems to be a binary choice in this election at a national level, and of course at a local level as well. That's the way it's being portrayed. Of course, we want a different electoral system. Proportional representation would, as other people have said, bring us much better and much more democratic results. In this constituency, if you want to vote Green, if you have a green heart, as it were, then you can vote Green here, because there really isn't going to be the contest that maybe some other candidates would be suggesting there is going to be. So here, to vote Green is a safe vote. Please vote Green.
Okay, yes.
On July the 4th, a week on Thursday, you will have a choice between a Conservative Member of Parliament or a Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament. The Conservative Party have destroyed our public services. They've increased the cost of living. They've brought the economy to its knees. Or you have the choice for Liberal Democrat MP, a member of the Liberal Democrat Party who will fight to undo the damage that they have done. This election is an opportunity to vote for a fair deal, for an end to the Conservatives' chaos, for properly funded public services and closer ties with Europe. A vote for Labour or the Greens here only risks rewarding the Conservatives for their years of broken promises and failures. If you elect me on July the 4th and allow me to represent you for another 5 years, I will spend every day defending our community and fighting for a better future for Richmond Park. Thank you.
Sarah, do you want to go next?
My message is not going to be political, and the reason why is that because I said at the beginning, this is about people and not about politics. I was on the side where we didn't have democracy, freedom and choices, and we didn't have much say on what was happening nationally. So I'd urge, regardless of who you vote for, regardless of what your decision is going to be, to put your heart on the 4th of July of who you want to see representing those Richmond values on the green benches. The only thing I hope that it comes out from this evening is that my commitment, my passion, my love for Richmond Park, and regardless of the outcome of this election, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I will fight to protect and preserve it.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It was really good to hear your questions and great to speak with you. But look, London's been my home for over 10 years, but we face so many challenges across this city, which you'll no doubt know about when it comes to the NHS, our trains, so much that's broken that needs to be fixed and needs to be changed. Now, all the tactical voting websites that you'll probably have seen, because I know that a lot of people will vote tactically in this constituency, tell you that you can vote with your heart this time for the first time in a long time. Imagine if we could, no offense, Sarah, but push the Conservatives into third place here. Imagine what message that would send. So vote with your heart, vote for what you believe in. If you believe in delivering a strong economy, in cutting NHS waiting lists, in launching a border security force, in setting up Great British Energy, cracking down on antisocial behaviour, getting schools back on their feet, then vote for change, vote Labour. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, may I thank the 4 candidates for being grilled by the pre-submitted questions and the ones from the floor. So give them a round of applause, everybody. Second, may I thank all of you for coming and for your questions, also to those who are online. And I hope that you could see and hear the proceedings. And I'm sorry if people's questions weren't taken. As you could probably gather, we could be here for another couple of hours, but I think the church want to get rid of us fairly quickly. So apologies for that, but thank you for those who did participate. And third but not least, may I thank my colleagues from the Richmond Society who've actually made the arrangements and made this possible, and also to our friends from the Q Society who've helped out. And last but not least, to Matt and his Duke Street team, who have been the technical whizzes. So, ladies and gentlemen, on the 5th of July, we will know who our next MP is going to be. And there are 7 candidates standing, and any one will be successful. And I remember a remark made by a losing candidate in an American election who said, "The people have spoken, the bastards." And on that note of levity, may I wish you all good night.